Hey everyone, welcome back to Voices of Calm, the Holiday Edition. I'm Andrea Ems, coming to you from California, and our friends and I are very excited to be able to continue sharing with you A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. But before we continue with this story and find out what's happening with Scrooge, let us thank a couple people and then introduce this amazing cast. First, big thank you to Dennis Daly and Kimberly Wetherell for putting together the scripts and copying it and making sure it's everything we need it to be to bring the story to you. And also, our cast, we have 3 narrators. We have Jennifer Dixon in Michigan, Anne Flosnik in Virginia, and Pearl Hewitt in Texas. Playing Scrooge is Alan Peterson in Utah. Bob Cratchit is played by Rico E. Anderson in California. Mrs. Cratchit is Gillian Bellinger in California. Martha Cratchit is Lucy Peterson in Utah. Belinda Cratchit and Carolyn is played by Madison Sawyer in Florida. Peter Cratchit is Nancy Peterson in Utah. And finally, Caroline's husband is played by Phil Thron in New Jersey. And now, Adam Barr.
Thanks, Andrea, and happy holidays, everyone, from Philadelphia. You know, for as much as Dickens could write about the joy and energy and enthusiasm of Christmas, when he needed to go heavy, he was equal to the task. And when the task was shocking his man Scrooge into the realization that he'd better make some major changes, Dickens pulled out all the scary, deep, horrible stuff, which we're about to see on the way to Scrooge's redemption. So let's continue onward with Stave 4, Part 2, The Last of the Spirits.
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side.
O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honoured head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares. They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that. And for the memory of one kind word, I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think.
Spirit, This is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go.
Ill, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head.
I understand you, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power.
Again, it seemed to look upon him.
If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you.
The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight, where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain, to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in their play. At length, the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer.
Is it good or bad?
Bad.
We are quite ruined.
No, there is hope yet, Caroline.
If he relents, there is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened.
He is past relenting. He is dead.
She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart.
What the half-drunken woman whom I told you of last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then.
To whom will our debt be transferred?
I don't know. But before that time, we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be a bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline.
Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure.
Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or that dark chamber, Spirit, which we left just now, will be forever present to me.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet.
And he took a child and set him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table, and put her hand up to her face.
The colour hurts my eyes.
The colour? Oh, poor tiny Tim.
They're better now. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time.
Peter shut up the book.
Past it, rather. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these few last evenings, Mother.
They were very quiet again. At last she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice, but only faltered once.
I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed.
And so have I, often.
And so have I.
So had all. Mrs. Cratchit resumed her work.
But he was very light to carry, and your father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. Ah, and there is your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him do it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid, each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said,
Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved.
Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said.
Sunday? You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear. I wish you could have come. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday.
He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have had farther apart. He and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were.
My little child. My little child.
He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again, quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked a little down,
on which, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard. I told him, I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit. He said, and heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how he ever knew that, I don't know.
Knew what, my dear?
Why, that you were a good wife.
Everybody knows that.
Very well observed, my boy. I hope they do. Heartily sorry, he said, for your good wife, if I can be of service to you of any way. He said, give me his card. That's where I live. Pray come to me. Now it wasn't for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our tiny Tim and felt with us.
I'm sure he's a good soul.
You would be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised. Mark what I say. If he got Peter a better situation.
Only hear that, Peter?
And then Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself.
Get along with you.
Just likely not one of those days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us?
Never, father.
Never, father.
And I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily amongst ourselves and forgive poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
No,
Never,
no,
father.
never, father.
I am very happy. I am very happy.
Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, his daughters kissed him, the two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed no order in these latter visions, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on, as to the end just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment.
This court through which we hurry now is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come.
The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere.
The house is yonder. Why do you point away?
The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look round before entering. A churchyard. Here then, the wretched man whose name he had now had to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with replated appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced towards it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me.
The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Scrooge fell on his knees.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed?
The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, no, spirit. Oh, no, no.
The finger was there. The finger was still there. Scrooge desperately clutched at the phantom's robe.
Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope?
For the first time, The hand appeared to shake. Scrooge fell prostrate before the spirit.
Good spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life.
The kind hand trembled.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me, and will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost.
What an ending to the stave. Still resonant after 180 years. And if you just give yourself over to Dickens, be it joyful or doleful, you can't help but feel it every time you hear it. And even though almost everyone knows the end of the story and how Scrooge goes about redefining himself, we want to come back and hear it every year. And we hope you will too, when the final part of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, presented by the Voices of Calm, drops on 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Christmas Eve, December 24th. For now, though, thank you. And for Andrea Ems and the rest of the cast, I'm Adam Barr. Goodbye.